Huawei just did something that chip experts said should not be possible right now. For 8 straight months, one of its most important laptops was running on secret silicon that nobody outside the company could confirm. No press release, no spec sheet, no announcement. Then one small software update ripped the secret wide open, and it turns out Huawei was hiding something big. The laptop is the MateBook Pro, and it launched all the way back in May 2025. From day one, buyers and reviewers noticed something strange. Huawei never listed the processor. Every other laptop maker on Earth brags about its chip on page 1 of the marketing. Huawei said nothing. That silence lasted 8 months, until the HarmonyOS 6 update rolled out and quietly revealed the chip's name inside the system settings for the very first time. The chip is called the Kirin X90, and it is not a small deal. This is the same processor already confirmed to be running inside the MateBook Fold, which means Huawei built one chip to power its entire premium laptop lineup instead of designing something different for each device. That is a real strategy, not a one-off experiment. Here are the actual numbers. The Kirin X90 uses a 4+4+2 core layout, which adds up to 10 cores and 20 threads. 8 of those cores run at 2.31 GHz, 2 more run at 2.05 GHz, and the whole chip can burst up to a maximum of 4.2 GHz. That is a real hybrid design, mixing performance and efficiency cores the same way major chip makers do it, just built entirely by Huawei's own engineers. But the cores are not even the most interesting part. Huawei did not license a graphics chip from anyone else. It built its own, called the Maleoon 916 GPU, completely in-house. It also built its own NPU, the part of the chip that handles AI tasks like photo processing, voice recognition, and machine learning. That means Huawei now controls every major piece of this chip from the ground up, with zero dependence on outside graphics or AI hardware. Keep that number in your head, 0, because that is the whole reason this story matters. Now here is the part that should genuinely shock you. Back in 2019, Huawei was placed on the United States Entity List. That single move cut Huawei off from American technology completely. It could no longer buy chip design tools from companies like ARM without special permission, and it lost its manufacturing relationship with TSMC, the company that was actually building Huawei's most advanced chips at the time. On top of that, the Dutch company ASML, the only company on the planet capable of building the machines that make the smallest, most advanced chips using extreme ultraviolet light, was pressured to stop selling that equipment to China entirely. At that point, almost every analyst in the industry agreed on one thing. Without ASML's machines, Huawei and its manufacturing partner SMIC would get stuck making older, weaker chips forever, while the rest of the world kept racing ahead. The gap was supposed to widen every single year until it became impossible to close. Without access to the newest extreme ultraviolet machines, Chinese foundries have leaned on older deep ultraviolet equipment, using a technique where the same layer of a chip gets exposed multiple times to squeeze out more detail than the machine was originally built for. It is slower, it is more expensive, and it produces more failed chips along the way. But it works, and the Kirin X90 is proof that it works well enough to power a real shipping laptop that people are using right now. The HarmonyOS 6 update that exposed the chip did not stop at just naming it either. It carried the February 2026 security patch and fixed an issue where the Celia AI assistant showed the wrong file size when exporting files. Small fixes on their own, but they show something important. This chip has been running long enough and stable enough for Huawei to keep pushing real software updates on top of it for months without needing to hide anything about the hardware underneath. A chip that was struggling would not get quiet, routine updates like this. It would get pulled. Remember those 20 threads from earlier? That number matters more than it sounds. 20 threads means this chip can genuinely run multiple heavy programs at the same time without slowing down. Real multitasking, not the marketing kind. And that 4.2 GHz peak speed gives it a real burst of power for single tasks that need it fast, like compiling code or crunching a big calculation in one go. Put those two numbers together and you get a chip built for actual laptop work, not just a chip built to win an argument on a spec sheet. This is exactly why Huawei stayed quiet for 8 months. Announcing a brand new domestically built chip while it is still being tested in the real world is risky. If something went wrong, if performance dropped, If the chip overheated under real use, that failure would have been front-page news everywhere. Instead, Huawei let the MateBook Pro sit on shelves quietly, let real customers use it every single day, and only confirmed the chip once it had already proven itself. That is not a marketing mistake. That is a company protecting its own reputation until the product earned the right to be named. There is a bigger pattern hiding underneath all of this. The whole point of the 2019 sanctions was to slow Huawei down and stop Chinese chip progress before it caught up to the West. But look at what actually happened instead. Huawei was forced to build its own operating system from scratch, which became HarmonyOS. Nobody is claiming that. It was Huawei hiding a win until it was ready to prove it. The bigger question now is simple. Huawei did not build a 1nm chip. That headline is wrong, and the real story is bigger than that fake claim. In May 2026, Huawei's chip chief He Tingbo unveiled a new design called Logic Folding at a conference in Shanghai. It skips 1nm lithography completely. It stacks transistors instead of shrinking them. That one decision might threaten TSMC more than any single chip ever could. To understand why this matters, go back to 2019. The United States hit Huawei with sanctions. Washington pressured the Netherlands to block a Dutch company called ASML from selling its most advanced machines to China. ASML is the only company on Earth that builds UV lithography machines. UV stands for extreme ultraviolet. These machines fire light at a wavelength of 13.5 nanometers to carve tiny circuits onto silicon. Without one, making chips smaller than 7 nanometers becomes nearly impossible. Each machine costs between $150 million and $380 million. Washington's plan was simple. Cut off the machine, and China's chip industry freezes in place. For a while, it looked like the plan worked. Then in September 2023, Huawei released the Mate 60 Pro phone. Engineers cracked it open and found a 7nm chip called the Kirin 9000S inside. It was made by SMIC, China's largest chip maker, without a single ASML EUV machine. That crack kept growing. Reports from 2025 placed Huawei engineers at a facility in Dongguan, testing pieces of a homemade EUV machine. The light source came from research at the Harbin Institute of Technology, using a method called laser-induced discharge plasma, or LDIP. Instead of blasting a laser at flying tin droplets the way ASML does. The LDP method vaporizes tin between two electrodes and zaps it with electricity. The result is the same 13.5 nanometer light that ASML machines produce, just made a completely different way. Trial production was set to start, with full manufacturing targeted for 2026. But here is the part almost nobody explains clearly. A working UV light source is not the same as a finished chip machine. Commercial lithography needs at least 250 watts of steady power to run fast enough for factory use. Huawei's early prototype reportedly produced somewhere between 100 and 150 watts. ASML's newest machines push past 500 watts. So how is Huawei actually building chips right now, while that gap still exists? The answer came out in a report from the American Enterprise Institute in April 2026. Researchers found that SMIC has already proven it can make 7nm chips reliably. It is also working on 5nm chips, though yields sit at only about 20% right now, meaning most of what comes off the line does not work. The report explains that Huawei is not waiting on the homemade EUV machine at all. It is buying older deep ultraviolet machines, models like the X90 1980 Sapphire, that current export rules do not even restrict. China reportedly bought around 90 of these machines in 2024 alone, worth billions of dollars, right before anyone thought to add rules against them. Using this older equipment and multiple patterning, Huawei is aiming to produce 1.6 million high-end logic dies in 2026 for its own AI chips. That number should stop you for a second. That is not a lab experiment. That is a supply chain built specifically to dodge the exact machine the West blocked. Now back to logic folding, the announcement that actually deserves the spotlight your title promised. On May 25, 2026, He Tingbo stood on stage at the International Symposium on Circuits and Systems in Shanghai and presented something called the Tau scaling law. The idea behind it is not to etch smaller circuits at all. Huawei claims this design reaches a transistor density equal to what a true 1.4 nanometer chip would deliver, but not until 2031. And not by actually printing at that resolution. It is density through stacking, not density through shrinking. Here is why that fall 2026 date is the real cliffhanger. If Huawei ships a working Kirin chip using logic folding on schedule, it proves China found a way to keep gaining computing power without ever needing an ASML machine again. That would not just be a workaround. Meanwhile, TSMC is not standing still. In the second half of 2025, it began mass-producing true 2-nanometer chips using gate-all-around transistors, with yields reportedly above 60%. Companies like Apple, Nvidia, and AMD already locked in production space for years ahead. Samsung tried to keep pace, but is struggling, with 2-nanometer yields sitting around 40% and 3-nanometer yields around 50%, compared to TSMC's 90%. So the real headline is not that China built a 1-nanometer chip, because it did not. The real headline is that Huawei found 2 different ways around the exact wall the United States built in 2019. One path runs through a slow, imperfect homemade EUV machine still years from matching ASML. The other runs through legally purchased older machines and a stacking design that could ship real product before this year ends. Watch fall 2026. That is when the world finds out whether logic folding was a slide in a conference room or a chip inside a phone. And if it is the second one, TSMC will not just be on alert. It will be facing a rival that stopped playing by the old rules entirely. Something that should scare every tech company on Earth. Zero. That's how many of their most advanced AI chips are shipping into China this year. Not fewer. Not reduced. Zero. A $50 billion market walked out the door, and it didn't collapse. It built its own replacement instead. This is the story of how one banned company built a chip good enough to make Silicon Valley nervous, and why the whole world is now forced to pick a side. In 1987, a man named Ren Zhengfei started a small trading company in Shenzhen with almost nothing. He grew up poor, one of 7 kids in a family that didn't always have enough food. Before he built anything, he worked as a military engineer, learning how to solve problems with barely any resources. He didn't start his company because he had a big dream. He started it to feed his family. That company was Huawei. For years, Huawei stayed quiet. They built phone networks in places bigger companies ignored. Slowly, they moved into smartphones, and by 2019, they had become the second biggest phone maker on the planet,